All right, it's been a while since I've done a podcast and had an interview that was this awesome. I've snagged some pretty good ones. I've had Rand Paul, I've had Jim Mars, but this time I've got a real treat for my listeners and readers. We've got one of the top guys in the nation in terms of intelligence and defense. I have with me Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer. He is a Bronze Star Medal recipient and Lieutenant Colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve. He's a CI-trained senior intelligence operations officer with more than 25 years of experience in the intelligence community. Currently, he is a senior fellow and special lecturer at the Center for Advanced Defense Studies in Washington, D.C. Colonel Shaffer, thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. You've condescended to come down to the sort of the
no, not at all.
the
Hey, look, I enjoy any time I can talk to folks about the war and how to improve things, and I always enjoy talking about my book. So
right.
Whatever you'd like to talk about, I'm good to go.
Well, the book was great. I finished it up today. I bought it over the weekend, read it last night and today, and
Cool.
I don't know if you noticed, but when I bought my copy, and I don't know if your typewriter is broken or something, but a lot of this there's like a lot of black streaks. I don't know if.
Well, if you put vinegar on it, it'll develop. So
Okay.
that's a joke, obviously. So.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting about that, what makes the book really fascinating is, according to the New York Times, they put out a story that the defense agency was going to apparently buy up the first 10,000 copies and possibly destroy them because there were elements that they thought were harmful to national security, and so what ended up was a redacted copy. Is that right?
That's correct. And they did buy them up, and they did destroy them, and we're preparing to sue DoD over the First Amendment violations because we not only strongly believe that there was something classified in there, we believe the entire event was meant to suppress my First Amendment rights rather than actually do anything to protect national security, based on the fact that everything I'm aware of in the book was available either in some open source somewhere or it was obtained through interviews of other folks who were there. And I actually did hire a researcher to go out and find the information.
Right.
And obviously, since we did that, plus the Army did review it, we were very convinced that while it's very, I think, damning in some instances, and the information may precede the previous public knowledge of some of this stuff, the basic premise and the basic issues are not new. Everything we talk about in that book is somewhere out there already.
Yeah, that's what's really interesting. I mean, some of the stuff is was out there in terms of like leaks, some of what was found in WikiLeaks, things like that.
Right.
If we could, before we get into the book, tell us, how did you get into spycraft? What was it that really piqued your interest in that, and tell us how you got into that.
Well, just briefly, I grew up in Lisbon, Portugal, and my dad was with the embassy there, and as a teenager going through school, you get exposed to a lot of ongoing things. I mean, it's just you get to see things.
Right.
And one of the aspects of embassy life, being close to the embassy there, was just watching the spy stuff going on. I mean, it was fairly obvious. You could figure it out pretty quickly once you figured out who the players were. So over the years, the time I was there, I got to see a lot of the stuff, and it really did intrigue me. So in the end, I do believe, what I observed in high school and being around the embassy community and a lot of the, spying and intrigue going on.
Right. So you grew up with it. You grew up with it then.
I'm sorry.
I said you grew up with it then.
I kind of grew up with it. Yeah, I think that's a good way of summarizing it. I did see it. I did. I was very much intrigued by it. So yeah, I think growing up around it helped me develop an interest in it.
All right. Well, getting into the book, what I find fascinating about this book, in terms of comparing it with other works in this genre, if you read something like Victor Marchetti's book, it's very dry, it's very technical for
Right.
this kind of a thing. And what your book does is it presents it in a very narrative form. And so this is you on the ground, your experiences firsthand. And so it literally almost reads like Robert Ludlum novel. I mean, it's exciting, And I think that makes.
Well, we designed it that way. I mean,
right.
Yeah, and frankly, I wanted the book to be something different. When we contractor to do the book, the publisher, Thomas Dunn Books, part of St. Martin's, really wanted something different, and I wanted to do something different.
Right.
So the two things we wanted to do through the book and the way it was done is, first off, give people an idea of what it's like to live, up front and personal, with, going to war, what it's like to be
Right.
there, what you go through, how you think. And so, as obviously as you read, and I appreciate your comments, I wanted people to feel like it felt to be, Tony Shaffer going through this stuff. And secondly, I tend to believe that people will remember things, lessons, and information better if they find it enjoyable to read. So the idea was, I hate to say we wanted to sugarcoat history. We kind of
Right.
wanted to sugarcoat history. We wanted to make it so that people would read it and come away with an understanding that's deeper than just simply reading something technical.
Right.
So that was actually something we intended, and I'm glad you picked up on that, because we actually did want to make it a very good read, outside of the fact that, hopefully people are learning things about the war at the same time they're enjoying the actual action adventure.
Right. And another thing about it, the parts that are censored or taken out, you can still read the book, and it doesn't destroy the meaning, or you can still get through it. It's still sensible, even though significant portions are deleted.
And I appreciate that. Thank you. And I think that most folks have found it to be true, that you still figure out what's going on pretty easily. And
Right.
Frankly, there's going to be some new articles coming out here in the very near future I'm aware of that's going to help put the pieces back together. So, I think over the next 2 months, people are going to be able to have a really good idea of the rest of the story.
Right.
There's been an investigative journalist named Peter Lance who's been doing some research on the book, and I understand he's about to complete an article which will complement and enhance the New York Times article on what was taken out. So
Right.
I expect that to be out here shortly. And the other thing is, obviously, the lawsuit. We're now literally in the final stages of planning a lawsuit against DOD over First Amendment violations. And this is no surprise. We've actually announced this. The LA Times did an article on this about a month ago when we first announced our intent to do a lawsuit. And that lawsuit may be further complicated by the fact that the Department of Defense is probably not going to be very happy about the way we're going to approach this. By the fact that I think we'll be able to very credibly and very quickly prove that the First Amendment issues relating to my ability to have free speech were
Right.
just trampled on.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I think you've already realized is that by the fact that some copies of the book unredacted didn't make it out,
Right.
by the benefit of the way DOD did its actions. Therefore, there's really the presumption is, of course, that since they did that, and the book is still available, and oh, by the way, there's been no security violations or breaches or anyone dying or anything bad happening.
Right.
It's kind of self-apparent that the book really wasn't that big a security risk to DOD.
And causing such a media storm about it. I mean, doesn't that even seem to sort of have a sort of reverse effect? I mean,
it absolutely did. And frankly, I warned the Army leadership who I was dealing with on this issue before they did what they did. I was actually at Army Reserve duty yesterday, and one of the funny things is that in August, early August, when this all first started happening, the Defense Intelligence Agency forced the Army to withdraw the approval for me to print the book. And this letter that they gave, by the way, this letter is actually available on FoxNews.com as part of their article on this issue.
Uh-huh.
The DIA article the letter basically said if this book is published, the free world's going to fall. And I told the Army when I received this letter, it's like, this is not going to work.
Right.
I am a media guy. I'm a spokesman for a think tank. I've become a student of public affairs and the media.
Right.
And obviously one of the first things is, as you've already learned from watching the book, the last thing you want to do if you want to suppress something is draw attention to it.
Exactly.
And that is exactly what they ended up doing.
Absolutely. Well, let's transitioning into the book. It's titled Spycraft. The subtitle is Spycraft and Special Ops on the Front Lines of Afghanistan and the Path to Victory. And as you get into the first few chapters, you talk about how you got interested in spycraft, so forth, so on. And you mention the dark arts and being sort of part of an elite squad that needs to engage in subterfuge, counterintelligence. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, there's always refer to as the second oldest profession. You've always had, as long as you've had people, and you've always had spying and the desire to figure what is doing. So
right.
espionage and all the things that go with espionage, spying is the common term, is one of the darkest arts. And there are those out there who learn the dark arts, and they apply them for any number of purposes. The government, whenever they take someone and turn them into an operative, they spend a lot of money. It's very expensive training.
Right.
Not quite as expensive as training someone to be a pilot, but it's very close. And they teach you, they enhance your skills. They give you skills. They enhance the ones you have. And in the end, like a gun can be used for
right.
good or bad purposes.
Sure.
The same thing can be said of the skills they give you as an operative. And I think that's been one of the observations I've made over the years, is that people can choose to use those arts and those capabilities for purposes of self-enrichment, manipulation of others, or you can try as best you can, and obviously it's one of those things, no one's perfect.
Right.
You can try the best you can to focus those capabilities on the primary purpose of why they give it to you, is trying to protect the country and do things to enhance our knowledge of the adversary. So that's really what spycraft is, the espionage idea is, and of course that's why I think that the Jedi Knight
right.
Sith comparison is apt for the purposes of the intelligence community.
Which is why I was making a dumb joke. I was wondering whether you were talking about referring to you guys as Jedi. I don't know. I didn't know if you were Mace Windu or Obi-Wan or were you Darth Vader.
I was most certainly hope I'm not Darth Vader, but I'd like to believe that I was on the light side of the Force.
Well, Darth ended up good. He ended up good in the end, though.
Well, yeah, after a long way, but I think everybody has their path between lightness and darkness.
I agree, right.
And I think that basically the search for truth is always something that everyone should be, I'd like to believe, is focused on, as one of their focuses in life. And
absolutely.
And frankly, that's one of the things I think people, even in the intelligence community, tend to lose track of, is what's the truth.
Right.
And over the years, it's been obvious that intelligence officers have been, their operations have become politicized, which, as was apparent during the build-up to the Iraq invasion, as I'd like to believe I was successful in illustrating in my book, that
right.
where the truth and what you find out, regarding the adversary is not necessarily what people want to hear. And
right.
when that happens, obviously there are consequences. And this especially is true when policy, the policy of a given administration becomes conflicted with the intelligence. So this is where, you really got to have folks who are willing to stand up and say, no, this is really the truth, this is what you need to pay attention to, rather than those who will then bend the intelligence around whatever the policy is. And this is, again, where I think, there are good forces and bad forces out there, and I'd like to believe that the Jedi Knights were the type of folks folks I worked with were most alike within that Star Wars comparison.
Right. Well, we certainly hope so. I mean, we're in trouble if not.
Oh, we're in trouble. Just the question is how deep we are. So, but
right.
I think, again, hopefully, people will come around and understand, especially within the policymaking community, it's more important to listen to the truth and accept bad news for what it is, rather
right.
than trying to pretend it doesn't exist.
Well, you mentioned that one of the first things you talk about is when you got to Afghanistan, and there were kids that were using the IEDs, the improvised explosive devices, and throwing them under, running up to you, and I would imagine that
right.
You talk about almost having to possibly shoot a kid right when you got there.
Right. Exactly.
The mental strain, I would think that you would have to go through. Would be something that I think most people just could not even conceive of. Is it something that you continually struggle with, or is it something that you just deal with, or how does that work for you?
That's a good question. Let me answer it 2 parts. First, the Army has had a huge problem with post-traumatic stress.
Right.
That is very clear that it is an issue that's happened